Hey, my name's Jesse James, and today I'm going to give you a different type of video. It's going to be going over the history hallway that we have at Evansville Harley-Davidson. One of my responsibilities at the dealership is Rider Academy Coordinator. And part of Rider Academy at a Harley dealership is you get to learn a little bit about Harley history. So I figured it'd be fun to go across that wall, hit some of the big spots of where I've personally find interesting of Harley-Davidson history. In no way am I like a historian. That's what the museum's for, as it were. So everything that I bring up is stuff of what I've been told and learned and read in my own spots. I'm curious to see what you guys' thoughts are, but enjoy. So this is the history hallway, and it covers most of the dates or big things that happened in Harley history. We are missing a few on there, but for the most part, I usually tell the story that I'm going to dive into a little bit here, and I'll add in some different little caveats here and there as we go, because I'm not going to dive into every single one, because I do think there are far more qualified people to tell the story, mostly people that are at the museum or people that were there and they lived it themselves. I tend to hit some of the high points across it and certain spots that like I personally think are cool. But we'll start up like any good story up here in the front. Back at the founding, 1903, something that most people have heard of, and the big idea at the time wasn't so much to be, best motorcycle producer ever. It was best form of transportation. This is still back in the days whenever cars were still very new. So the idea of just putting a gas tank and an engine on a bicycle essentially was a wild concept. And even though it didn't per se win overall, because later on we would see most people prefer cars, they prefer to be insulated. There's still plenty of them out there, and it spread this whole separate thing of what we know as motorcycle culture today. Next major thing is the first V-twin wasn't actually until 1909 that you see there. And one of the things that for Harley, I think that a lot of people kind of forget is we have never been the most advanced. It's always been chasing a style and a feel more than really anything else. And some people love us for it, other people hate us for it. But it's crazy to think that the V-twin, it's been around for over 100 years now. The next one that I'll point up here is the lady that you see here, commonly referred to as the enthusiast girl, is Vivian Bates. And in 1929, she was the first documented woman to go across the entire U.S. from what I've been able to research and find on it. But for me, the cooler thing is the fact that for spade, women riders are something that even nowadays you hear a lot of dealerships and a lot of things saying, oh, getting women more involved with riding, it's a new thing, blah, 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 blah. But the reality is they've been around for a very long time. And that was actually something I didn't know until doing research on this hallway and getting stuff set up. And I personally think that's a really cool thing. Just women riders have been a very big and popular thing since the 1920s. So I figured I'd take a second to bring it up because it is a very, very important part of not just U.S. history, but also Harley history with our involvement in World War II. But I feel like there's plenty of people that have talked about that bike. And what's crazy is the number of people that'll come into the showroom. I'll have like one or two every 3 or 4 months wanting to know, not if we have one, but if we have one for sale, which is absolutely wild to me. But the next bike that I will bring up that I think is interesting that I didn't know is the Sportster platform didn't actually officially exist till 1957. And the idea is so different from what we consider Sportsters now today of, oh, it's a good learner bike and, if you drop it, you won't hurt because it's super cheap. At this point, this was a true race bike. And because light, and I don't remember off the top of my head what power it was doing, but it's crazy to think that the Sportsters that hadn't been around since 1957, and for the one photo there was actually like race oriented was what it was going for. So the more interesting story for me actually happens dating from 1969 to 1981 in the AMF years. And the thing that I find interesting about it is, in 1969, American Machine Foundries bought the rights to be over Harley-Davidson, and we no longer owned ourselves for the first time ever. And from what I have been told, the reason that Harley was actually on the verge of bankruptcy at that point was because, turns out, 4 guys in a shed, as they call it, are really good for coming up with big brain ideas and for building building machines and coming up with a concept that, historic now, but not so great at the paperwork side. And so for AMF, they came in and bought Harley-Davidson and essentially taught us how to better keep records of things, helped on the administrative side. And there's a lot of the stuff that apparently, from not only at a corporate, but some to a dealership structure, is still being used today. Now, the truth of parts of that, as I said, this is all just a story that's relayed to me. So that's what I'm putting up here. But for me, whenever you fast forward it, you go over to the fella pictured here in 1981, that's Willie G. Davidson. And he, as you can see, the AMF is crossed out there on the shirt, and that's when Harley-Davidson was bought essentially from AMF by Willie G. and the board. And there's a whole story there where apparently when the company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and a lot of it had to do with quality control. The quality of the bikes had started to fall through, and that's where you hear, hey, if Harley's leaking oil, that means that it has oil, and if it's not leaking, that means it's out of oil. Apparently the way that story goes is, on one side they had Willie G at the dinner table, and he had a stack of paperwork for bankruptcy, company going under again. And on this other side, it was paperwork for a loan to buy the company back, and a lot of it was hinged on the motor that would come out in 1984, the Evo motor. A more reliable motor to come out and essentially save the motor company. And that's why, again, a lot of people say the Evo is the best motor out there. It did save the motor company because the quality had gone down. Now, whether that you can blame that on the shovel or not, I think there's still a lot to be said in general in the fact that the guy based all of it off of that motor right there. Now, the really cool thing about Willie G that I didn't learn till much later is he actually didn't go to school for business. He went to school for art, graphic design. And whenever I learned that, I actually came back here and it did a little bit of a zoom out, as it were. And if you cut the timeline kind of in half from 81, all the bikes, for the most part, kind of look the same. And while to some degree it's due to technology that was available at the time, you could also argue that maybe just didn't have that eye for art. Everything after that he's the principal designer on it, that's where you know Harley's style from stuff of like as simple as the Fat Boy, and that came out in 1990, made famous by Arnold. The Road Glide that came out in 98, had a hand in the V-Rod in 01, and then a lot of the other bikes that would come later can be attributed to him. And I'll dive into a little bit of what made him and Harley so instrumental at that point of how they were coming up with these ideas, because it's something that personally I do think the motor company in some regards has stepped away from, but we'll dive into that in a second. So then I want to fast forward a little bit here and go up to 2003 as the next big point that I wanted to kind of take a second with. And not only because it was the 100th anniversary of Harley-Davidson, but because that era did a lot that I think we're still kind of feeling the effects of today in a motorcycle culture. So 2003, motorcycles are as big as they're about to really ever be up until that point in history. And a lot of it has to do of just the age demographic that is available to be able to purchase motorcycles and be involved in motorcycle culture is at that perfect sweet spot. But also bikes are then available, easier to get a hold of than ever, paired with that celebration. This was during the era where you were seeing plenty of motorcycle shows on TV whereas you don't see it as much today. And I'm not talking like stuff like Mayans or Sons of Anarchy. I'm talking stuff like the biker build-ups were very popular at this time. And because of that era, I think we're still feeling a little bit of it today, because I still have salespeople that were selling during this point that'll come in and say, oh, it's nothing like it used to be. Oh, it's nothing like it used to be. And completely agree. That's the heyday. And so I'm curious to see what the future looks like. But I do think that maybe in the comparison of the absolute madness that was 2003, not the best spot with it. The other big thing is Harley actually learned something very important, which was when we're building anniversary models, they hilariously overproduce the 100th anniversary ones. So it's one of the few anniversary motorcycles that whenever we're talking pure value, isn't nearly as valuable as they were making them to seem that they would be at the time. Like, I think for myself personally, I've seen more 100th anniversary motorcycles than really any other anniversary year, even of the modern setup. The next year I wanted to point out is here in 2006, and the photo here is of the very first Street Glide. Now, earlier I mentioned how Willie G was doing something that I think that if the motor company getting more involved and getting back to doing what he was doing at that point would be a great thing. So where the Street Glide came from was Willie G would go to bike shows. He would go and see what custom bikes people were building, what they were doing, and what he was finding was that a lot of people were buying electric glides at the time, chopping off the tour pack and riding around that way most of the time. And the reason being is because it's lighter. You were still getting a touring chassis, but you weren't having to, if you weren't riding with somebody, you weren't having to have all that extra weight in the back. So he would ask people, it's like, hey, if we can just do that from the factory and make it like $2,000 cheaper, would you be interested in something like that? And they said yes. So he went back and said, hey, we can do this. And long story short, Street Glide then becomes a bike that's from the factory. That way you don't have to do any more cutting and chopping to it. And it quickly becomes one of the most popular motorcycles Harley-Davidson ever made. And the cool thing, whenever I think about that right there, is because it had that culture of doing the chopping to it. I know for a while I met several people that if it was, they would call Street Glides electric glides and use it pretty interchangeable, because for a good while there, that's the way the culture was. All bikes that looked like a Street Glide were actually just electric glides with tour packs chopped off. One of the last things I'll bring up here on the History Hallway is 2018. This was when Harley made the controversial decision not of putting the latest Big Twin in their middleweight cruiser lineup, but merging the Dyna and the Softail families together and calling them all Softails, or the new Softail as they were calling it at that point. So my problem with that isn't because they were doing away with the Dyna or anything like that, but it was just calling all of it Softail, but it's a whole new family of bikes. And while I get it to a degree of technically, if you can't see the suspension and it looks like a hardtail, but it has suspension, that does make it a Softail. I think it's led to just a lot of confusion, even into nowadays, I still have customers come in and they ask to see a Dyna and they'll see a lowrider and be like, oh, that's a Dyna, whenever that's definitely not the case. And then for stuff here towards the end, biggest thing I like to point out is the road ahead. Because truth be told, we don't know what's really going to come from not just Harley-Davidson, but riding in general. What's going to be popular? What is going to come and impact things where the motor company will either be involved or have to adjust around it. And for me, the big thing, if there's any big takeaway from the History Hallway that I try and tell people, or just in general, beyond just listening to me ramble, is for all of Harley history, while yes, it's been continuous, unbroken, 75% market share, American traditional, blah, 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 all those great trigger words, right? The big thing that I've taken away from it over the years is we haven't always gotten it right. There's been a lot of good, a whole lot of bad, but to continue going through it, roll with the punches, and continue to try and get better. It's a big part of Harley-Davidson. So we'll see what comes next for it and where, again, the road ahead leads. And that is going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving a like. If you want to see more content like this, or bike reviews, or vlogs of what it's like working in a sales department at a Harley dealership, consider giving a subscribe. Any spots on the wall that stand out to you, or stories if you were there? I'm curious to see what you guys have to say, but more than anything, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you out there riding.